You are listening to 95.7 FM WELT, Fort Wayne, Radioactive. The opinions and views expressed in the show are those of the hosts and guests only. They do not represent those of FreeThought Fort Wayne, WELT, or any other organization. Welcome to the Hoosier Humanist Hour, where we explore science, religion, culture, ethics, and community from the humanist perspective. Join us as we discuss those topics and more, free from the ideologies of religion and superstition.
Good evening, and welcome to the Hoosier Humanist Hour. The Hoosier Humanist Hour is a show dedicated to discussions on all things humanism and or pretty much anything from the humanist perspective. This show is brought to you by volunteers from FreeThought Fort Wayne. My name is Caleb. I'm joined today by D. How you doing, D?
I'm doing great, Caleb. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic today, actually. I've had a pretty good day. How about you, Andrew? We're also joined by Andrew, who will be sticking around in the background.
Hey there.
Today's episode is going to be titled The Unorthodox Orthodoxy. Basically, we're going to be talking about different strange religious practices from around the world. Of which I thought we would start with something pretty exciting. There's a Japanese Buddhist tradition known as, and I'm going to slaughter this, but Sokushin Butsu, or I'm going to try that one more time. Sokushin Butsu, which is essentially a form of self-mummification. A volunteer to mummify yourself, it's a process that can take several years. In fact, it's been known to take up to a decade in certain cases. But the method is actually quite simple and relatively effective. In principle, all they're doing is eliminating as much body fat as possible as step one, and then they want to try and get rid of as much of the bacteria in and on the body as possible as well. So that's step two. So what they do for that is they actually drink poisonous tea. And they do that for quite some time. So not only are they starving themselves to death off of a diet of essentially nuts and bark, then they fast. After a several-week fast, or however long it is, I can't remember actually, then they drink this tea, which kills all the bacteria in their gut. After they get really, really close to death, I mean, they're right on the verge, they end up putting them in a stone tomb in the ground. And they bury him in there with nothing more than a hole to breathe out of and a rope that's attached to a bell on the surface. The bell's there so that the participant can ring it and let the people on the surface know that they're still alive. They do that once a day, every morning. And once the bell quits ringing, then they just close up the air hole and call the dude mummified and move on to the next dude. But
this is unbelievable.
That's what I'm saying, man. This one really.
Are you sure? Like, you're absolutely sure that this exists?
Yes. Now here's
or did exist, because just the sheer willpower to do something like that is impressive. Absolutely, man. This is very real. However, I do have to say that there have only been 24 known cases of this. Now, they do think that there were potentially hundreds of these, but they only have proof of 24. This show. I'm going to try this one more time. So, Kushinbutsu was mainly practiced in northern Japan sometime between the 11th and the 19th centuries, and so this has been practiced over a large period of time. I mean, that's 800 years or so. So what is their reason for doing this? Like, what is it they're trying to achieve? I mean, you have to have some serious dedication to pull this off. You say that this can take as long as 10 years to pull off?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they are 100% dedicated to this. My wife asked me today why they did this. And, I really tried looking into this. And essentially, it's kind of just a preference. That's essentially what it comes down to. They call this asceticism, I believe, which is a way of life. And so there are different ways of wanting to end your life. People, it's really hard to think about this because we're just intuitively ecocentric. We just view the rest of the world from our own culture and our own perspective. We don't have a choice. It's kind of built into us. So we don't think about death the same way that these guys do. So this is just a way that they choose to die. Like if you wanted to be cremated, you'd be cremated. These guys want to turn into a mummy, so they go through this process.
So are you saying that the fear of death is not really like a universal trait amongst humans?
Now, I wish I had taken better notes on that, but I did specifically run into a religion of one of those, like, it's one of those really difficult to pronounce tribes in those island tribe nation types, but they had absolutely no concept of an afterlife at all. Like that whole idea never even dawned on them. They just don't think about it. People are there, and then one day they die. They realize their body's dead, but they just bury them and move on. Like they just don't have a concept of an afterlife. So I can't imagine how they think about that dead. Like they're gonna die one day, if they even have that notion. To be honest with you.
Really, not even that notion?
I don't know. I mean, they don't have a concept of an afterlife. I mean, I'm sure that some of them kind of, look up at the stars and think, oh, I wonder if there is something after this. I don't know. But as far as mainstream there, like in their culture, in fact, it went so far as, man, I really wish I had better notes on this. They actually don't even have a word for God or the afterlife in their language. It just doesn't exist. So if you went there as a Christian missionary trying to describe Christianity to these people, you would have to define God for them, because they don't have a word for that. And you would have to give them a good, because that's what missionaries are doing. They're trying to sell you something. They're trying to sell you religion. So if you were to walk up to these people, you couldn't even speak their language to sell it to them. It would. It's the best way I can describe it.
Wow, it's amazing how much variation humanity can experience, and it's craziness.
I was watching this. It was this Netflix comedy. It was by this comedian, Joe Rogan, I believe it was, and he was talking about how he was getting high on the ocean, and there were dolphins jumping next to him, and how when the dolphins would jump, they'd kind of look at him. But what he said was, when they look at you, it's not like they're like a deer looking at you and then just kind of go about doing their thing. He's like, they look at you like a person would look at you. And, got him thinking about, maybe they have their own sense of me. And just like I have my own sense of me, maybe they have their own sense of me. And I was like, that's actually a really interesting point. And so I started thinking about stuff like that. I started wondering, well, I wonder if, because I know that there are like orangutans, for example, that know how to fish with fishing rods and spearfish. And there are people who are saying that we are legitimately witnessing the birth of their Stone Age. There's only ever been one species on this planet that's had a Stone Age, but looks like we're witnessing the birth of the second Stone Age. These orangutans, and there are some apes and stuff that are building pretty complex tools just beyond a stick.
That's really interesting way to think about it. There's an attorney. I watched a documentary about this guy. He's an attorney trying to grant personhood to certain animals, like elephants, like basically a legal protection for these animals that have some sort of consciousness similar to us. Maybe they grieve.
That was.
They grieve. They seem to have some reasoning. They have memory and family. In a way that's similar to us. But I don't know. Elephants are one that come up a lot, and dolphins.
Well, elephants are really fascinating. They, everybody knows about elephant graveyards. And that still baffles us for the most part. I do
not know about elephant graveyards. Tell me about elephant graveyards. Catch me up.
Oh, okay, sure. So there's this phenomena where when elephants are on the verge of natural death, just old age on average, or if the circumstances are right, if they're just nearby when this happens. But when elephants are on the verge of death, they tend to migrate, and they will migrate for hundreds of miles to a very specific location. and it's a location where they go to literally die. And I'm not entirely sure if anyone knows. I certainly don't know, but I don't know if anyone knows why they go there specifically to die, because that's it. They go there and they die. And there's evidence of this because there's just tons of elephant carcasses and bones laying around. And it's just this really strange phenomenon. And the other elephants will mourn the elephant that leaves.
Mm-hmm.
You can document this, and it has been documented. And so it is interesting to see these sort of human-like emotions coming out. Which I don't know. Maybe that's not fair to say. Maybe it's unfair to say human emotion. Maybe it's just emotion, and we happen. That's all it is. Shoot, what am I saying? We're just
well, I mean, it's obviously different than I would think it's different than a worm, but maybe not. But at least like a cow, right? I don't know. Does a cow grieve too?
I'm right there as far as this conversation goes. I'm right there with Daniel Dennett. I think he aced it as far as I'm concerned. I think he's got the best reasoning on this. The way that I think that consciousness emerges, because that's what I believe. I believe that consciousness is an emergent property. And I think that it emerges from just the natural function of the nervous system. And the more complex, the more specified the nervous system, the more conscious, quote unquote, for more aware, I guess, that entity, whatever X is, can be. So, there are different ways of perceiving reality as well. So the difficulty comes in trying to measure what is, say, what constitutes a measurement on this scale. Like, does the ability to see X-rays make you more conscious of reality since you can see things that humans can't? Or does that just give you some advantage in survival but doesn't make you more self-aware, more conscious, or whatever that means? Because like you were saying, certainly we are more conscious, more sentient, I think is a better word, than a worm. But, how much more sentient are we than apes? Maybe we're only 2% different genetically, give or take. So maybe that 2% is really the only difference between us and them cognitively. I honestly couldn't tell you. Just speculating.
Yeah. God, what a wonderful question. Well, I could keep going, but let's stay on track.
Okay. Well, since Shukenbutsu or whatever that was, God, that was a horrible one to pronounce. Ugh, why did I pick that? So I had a good time doing research for this. This was a lot of fun doing research for this topic.
Pick some more good ones.
All right. Well, on the same track as the last one, something a little easier to pronounce, Selak is another tradition where people can volunteer to kill themselves for the sake of religion. But this one's actually...
I'm just assuming that these religions are dying out, right?
Well, Jainism's still pretty popular these days. I mean, this particular one, Selak, there are around 200 Jains per year that do this, that participate in this religious ritual. Essentially, however, granted, I make it sound pretty terrible, but I kind of tease. Because in all honesty, the only way that you're allowed to participate in this is if you are terminally ill. That's really the only exception. I started doing a little bit more research into this because it sounded at first as if it was if you're either terminally ill or if you feel that you've met your life's goal, like your purpose is complete and you no longer feel the need to live. At first I was getting that because the information on this is kind of scattered, but that is not the case. They're very pacifistic in Jainism. It's a very dense, very sophisticated religion, and this process, Selak, is one wherein the participants literally starve themselves to death. That's essentially all it really is. It's a way to go out on your own terms. Like I was saying before, around 200 Jains per year kill themselves in this fashion. And those who volunteer they're actually highly respected amongst other Jains. The individuals who participate don't actually declare themselves suicidal either. That's another thing that I want to kind of emphasize, because again, like we were talking before, everyone tends to be egocentric. When people kill themselves, we tend to think that that's suicide, no matter what. You take your own life, that's suicide. But they don't really see it that way. They actually see it as an act of humility. The idea being that, for example, before one can volunteer to do this, they must proclaim that they neither want to die or live. The idea being that the decision should be made in a state of indifference. So they don't want people making this decision biasly, is the idea behind that.
That's so ridiculous.
Yeah.
You have to want to die to starve yourself for however long it takes. I mean, how can you be in a state of indifference? I guess my bias is coming out here, but
I agree. I think there are right and wrong answers here, and I'm right there with you. I think that if you're going to intentionally starve yourself to death, that is suicide, in my opinion. I'm right there with you. I don't necessarily think that suicide is a bad thing, though. If that's what you're getting at.
No. I'm not trying to judge suicide itself. I mean, that's a whole nother topic, obviously. But no, I'm just saying the idea of being impartial to it, just, I don't know, seems ridiculous to me. But
well, I mean, it's really hard to put yourself in their shoes. It's.
Well, I mean, one must have a desire to live just to avoid walking off a cliff.
Okay.
Right?
Well, I think I might be able to try and put this into perspective a little bit. If we delve into the language itself, right? The word selekana, it's made up of two words, sal, which means properly, and lakana, which means to thin out. So the way that they incorporate this into their theology and exegesis, if you will, to put this in perspective for people, they're properly thinning out not only the body but their passions. It's like them sanctifying themselves during this process by going through this process.
Right.
So that's how they kind of perceive it. Maybe that will help kind of put it into perspective a little bit. I kind of hope so, because like I said, it's really hard. In fact, I have a great quote here that's wonderful. I actually picked this up on Wikipedia as to why they would do this. The following is just a relatively famous analogy. So it goes like this. A merchant stores commodities for sale and stores them. He does not welcome the destruction of his storehouse. The destruction of the storehouse is against his wish, and when some danger threatens the storehouse, he tries to safeguard it. But if he cannot stop the danger, he tries to save the commodities at least from ruin. Similarly, a householder is engaged in acquiring the commodity of vows and supplementary vows, and he does not desire the ruin of the reciprocal virtues, namely the body. But when serious danger threatens the body, he tries to avert it in its righteous manner, without violating his vows. In case it is not possible to avert danger to the body, he tries to safeguard his vows at least. So it's like essentially a way of defending your honor. Kind of like the Bushido Code, if you want to take your own life, but do it in a non-cowardly way.
Yeah, still sounds dumb to me.
No, I agree. This is really silly. I didn't open this up on their side necessarily.
I know. It's just God. It's really. I think a lot of this stuff is just depressing to me. It's kind of like we were talking about. Maybe we're watching a caveman or new intelligence emerge by watching monkeys. Well, it's just like it's just using a stick to pull ants out of a hole or something. Well, that's what I feel like humans are doing with religion. Like, it's like the very basics, and it's so ridiculous. Like, how can people buy into this stuff? What's the next crazy one? Christianity?
I will save that for a minute. We'll put that off for just a second. But since you say we're depressed, let's go to a happy fun place.
Please, let's go. Let's go to a happy fun place.
All right. Our happy fun place is Queen Elizabeth's bedroom, because
Queen Elizabeth's bedroom?
That's right. Prince
That's your happy place?
That's my segue to our next subject, sir.
Heck yeah. Let's go to that.
All right. In her bedroom, you will likely find, well, I don't know, maybe not, Prince Philip. Believe it or not, there is actually a religion entirely centered around Prince Philip. This is a cargo cult. For those of you who don't know what cargo cults are, they became relatively popular. Their numbers grew quickly in the World War I, World War II saga of our history. Essentially what happens is somebody from a modern industrialized country goes to an island nation that's probably never seen another human being aside from a member of their own tribe and neighboring tribes ever. And because of their awe-inspiring technology, they inadvertently create new religions.
That's awesome.
One of them is actually called the Prince Philip movement. It's a religious sect that's followed by I believe they're called the Kastam people. They're on a village on the island of Tana, I believe. So here's how this started. Okay, according to the ancient tales, the son of the mountain spirit traveled over the seas to a distant land. There, he married a powerful woman, and in time would return to them. And okay, so what happened was, when the people of this village area believed that Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, the consort of Queen Elizabeth II, they actually believe that he is a divine being, that he is literally a god. Because of this, he visited their island one day, and because of this wow factor, these people revered the queen so much. They saw that they revered the queen, and as their prophecy foretold, he would marry a powerful woman across the seas. They assumed that Prince Philip was their savior. Now, this is a real legitimate thing. What's amazing is that they actually sent photos back and forth. At least Prince Philip and the Queen Elizabeth. They would send the villagers photos. I don't think that they ever actually even attempted to tell these village people that they weren't gods. Quite honestly.
They were like,
I honestly don't. Yeah, well, I'm serious. They sent them photos, and then the villagers responded by sending what's called a nanal. It's a traditional pig killing club. So, it's actually pretty cool looking. They put a lot of work into it. It looked really nice. And he sent them back a photo of him holding this thing so that they knew that he got it. And he's just reaffirming this religion. So this thing's still thriving. These people still believe that this man is a god. Have you ever heard of John Frum?
No.
John Frum is another deity figure of one of these cargo cults. One of the most famous ones, the ones that, John Frum, they believe, is a derivation on John from America, or John from England, perhaps. But that's just where they think that it came from. So these people, I'm sorry, they know it's from America. I take that back, because their entire civilization has been, henceforth, their sole purpose is to emulate the American Navy. So they have like American flags. They maintain the airfield that they made, the airstrip. They maintain that in hopes that these people will come back. They make these wooden, really they're these little wooden airplane-like things, right? Because they worship the planes too. They think like they're magical chariots or something along those lines. So
what is this one called?
I honestly don't know what this particular one is called. This one's just, it's a cargo cult. I think it's the John Frum cult. I think that's just how they refer to them. Like the John Frum cult, John Frum movement, and this one that I was just talking about was the Prince Philip movement.
That's really cool stuff.
I actually found out, I wish I had time to look into this, but apparently in 2007, a British television channel broadcast a show called Meet the Natives. It was a reality TV show, and they actually brought 5 Tana men from the Prince Philip movement island to meet Prince Philip in Britain.
No way.
Yeah.
Wow.
Their visit culminated in an off-screen audience with Philip.
Were
You know,
they
there was
like,
gifts exchanged. And...
was this place that they came from, like, do they have passports and stuff? Like, do they have electricity? I mean, or are these people tribal?
No, yeah, they're very tribal.
Wow.
They
So
still worship Prince Philip as a god.
flying in a plane must have been unbelievable.
Oh, I know. That's a good point, too. You know, I'm just sitting here thinking, you know what? I'm sitting here completely focused on the fact that they're probably thinking nothing but, oh, I'm going to meet my God. Can you imagine thinking that you're going to meet your God?
Yes.
Somebody comes to you from the land from which your God hails from
Yes.
on a magical iron bird
Yes,
that says,
that
hey, you want to meet God?
Right, man. What a trip for those guys. We were there, man. We were there in heaven.
Have you ever seen... Oh, never mind. Let's not go there. I was going to go to a dark place.
It's like
I like where we're at.
Like in Christianity, that would be like a couple angels coming down and being like, "Hey, you want to go meet God?" And you're like, "Hell yeah!" And you fly up with some angels and meet God, and they bring you back. Nobody would ever believe you, though. Do you think those guys are believed?
No, dude. I mean, people were crying bullcrap on Christianity since Christianity existed.
No,
it's in the Bible.
I'm saying the tribal people who came to England. I think when they came back, anybody believed them. There's probably deniers.
Oh, I see what you say. You know what? Absolutely. Because you know there are people that are going to be like, no way.
Right.
Surely it was like this. That's how the legend foretold.
Yeah, but most of the people would be like, wow, these 10 dudes met God and came back. Like, you can't get any cooler than that. If you actually met God.
I wonder if they still believed when they... Because, like I said, I wish I had time to look into this. I just discovered that not even, like, an hour before we started doing this, which is really unfortunate, because I want to watch that. I'm sure I could look into this.
So this is a documentary that we could watch, or is this just we could watch, like, the television that...
No, this was, from what I understand... No, it's a reality show. It's a British reality show called Meet the Natives. It's pretty old, though. It's from 2007. It's 10 years old.
That's not that old. Is it like a BBC thing?
British television channel. I don't know. I don't know anything about British television, sir.
Sorry. I'm totally sidetracking this thing. Yeah, it is a BBC thing. 5 men from remote Pacific island of Tana arrive in America to experience Western culture for the first time.
Oh, it was America. See, my sources here is telling me that they moved.
Are these people from Tana that you're talking about?
Yeah, it says here that it was 5 men on a visit to Britain. Yeah. Well, my information could very well be wrong.
Here's another episode. A revolutionary concept of introducing the tribes of South Pacific to the British way of life and recording how they react. That's pretty wild.
Does it look positive? From what you're
It looks
saying?
fun to watch.
Yeah, I think I'm going to watch it regardless.
Yeah, I'm watching it. So, Caleb, let's talk about magic underwear. Let's go into this one. What are you talking about with the magic underwear? This is Mormonism, I'm assuming?
This is Mormonism, and sir, to be politically correct, it's garments.
Sorry.
That's the official term here. No, I'm right. No, magic underwear. That's entirely accurate. And if they want to argue otherwise, then ask them to define the difference between magic and miracle and watch them crumble. But magic underwear, the sacred underwear that they wear, and I love this stuff. I found this absolutely hilarious. This stuff is designed to protect them from spiritual contamination. They also serve to symbolize some sort of agreement between Mormons and their God, which I don't honestly know the nature of this agreement. Do you know anything about that?
No.
Do you know anything about these magic underwear?
No, is it? I mean, is Mormonism like a sect of Christianity?
Absolutely, it is. Yeah.
Okay.
Mormonism, for those who don't know, is a Christian sect, and I'm perfectly comfortable using that terminology, that was started by a man named Joseph Smith in the 19th century. Don't listen to anything that I have to say on Mormonism. I just recommend reading The Mormons by David Fitzgerald. That book is essentially the counter-apologetic on all things Mormonism. It exposes it for what it is. It is entirely bullcrap from start to finish. And it's it's a religion that was propagated by a known fraud whose witnesses publicly recanted. And this still became the wealthiest religion per capita in the United States. $30 billion these people have to their name as a church, as a society. Anyway,
Wow.
they have some pretty bonkers beliefs. The reason why they're still Christians, now maybe I should start here first, come to think of it. The reason why they're still considered Christians is the story goes that after Jesus was crucified, he made his way over to the Americas and became essentially the Jesus of Native Americans. That's essentially how Joseph Smith tells of the genesis of Mormonism, and it's kind of all crazier and crazier from there. Long story short, what you need to know is Joseph Smith translated these 2 golden plates, which conveniently cannot be seen by the eyes of man should they die, and then once he was done scribing them, they were whisked away into the ether, never to be seen again, which is rather convenient. And all of his translations of actual cuneiform have been proven to be complete and utter bullcrap. He was trying to translate Egyptian hieroglyphs to people and telling them that this was Mormon doctrine and or some other, nonsense, because we hadn't actually found the Rosetta Stone yet. And
Right.
once we had found the Rosetta Stone, we found out that all of his, it was just bull, it was just nonsense. He was just making crap up.
It was
And
like
in fact,
directions to the nearest bathroom. That's what it was in Egyptian.
there one of the more popular ones was he translated an actual piece of Egyptian something. It was like a tablet that actually has something on it, and he claimed to be able to translate that. Mind you, he was at this point relatively influential in his community, so people took him rather seriously. So there's a person who happened to have this tablet, took it to him. That was a Mormon because they believed that he could translate this, and he turned that into some official Mormon scripture, dogma, or something. And it turned out to be, when it properly translated, it was the burial ritual for pharaohs. It was the directions on how they did it. That's what it was. So that's Mormonism in a nutshell. Any questions on that? I mean, I know it's kind of confusing because it's weird, but I'm trying to give you the briefest possible explanation of Mormonism.
So
we believe that Jesus, told. Jesus is still the central figure for this religion. I mean, they're the Church of. Oh man, what are they called? Oh man, Jesus Christ is in their name. I can't.
Latter-day Saints.
That's what it is. That's exactly right. Jesus Christ said it. Yes. Anyway, let's get to the magic underwear, because Mormonism is really. I know some about it. I know I probably, to somebody who knows nothing about Mormonism, sound like a genius, but I assure you, I don't know very much about Mormonism. And what I do know is have an interest in learning more.
It sounds legit.
It's a legitimate. Oh my goodness, man! 3 out of 4 people in Salt Lake City are Mormon, and they consider that a corrupt town because there's 25% more not Mormon in there. Mormonism is incredibly pervasive in some areas of the United States, man. Utah is just nothing but Mormons. It's crazy. And
awesome.
Most of those Mormons happen to wear sacred underwear. In fact, all of them should. And by the way, these are not cheap for those who might be curious. Yes, they are not just volunteering their services to give them their required garments by any means, but that would just be Jesus-like. These sacred underwear that they buy are designed to, again, protect them from spiritual contamination. And I'm sorry, I already said that. So practicing Mormons, they have this reverence for this sacred underwear.
So everybody wears this underwear all the time? Like it's just standard underwear procedure?
It's a standard thing. It's their way of being Amish discreetly.
So how much do these things cost? I'm sure size matters to some extent. Did you see a price on them?
Yeah, I mean, you could get really cheap ones for like, mind you, this is one set, top bottom, for like $20. Like,
Okay.
and you can get pairs of them for like 35, 40.
So does like Hanes make this? Is there like a Hanes magic underwear line for Mormons, or is there like some Mormon company that makes this stuff?
My notes on Mormonism and their underwear are, admittedly, what I do know from what I've investigated personally is they're pretty expensive for some underwear that they're required to wear. They almost only come in white. There are only certain exceptions for being able to wear other colors. Like armed service members, for example, they're allowed to wear different colored underwear. Excuse me.
Is that like a reward, or is that just the way it is?
That's a good question.
Yeah. I'm expecting you to know way too much.
No, I don't blame you. Like I said, I try to, whatever I say, I try to make it so that I know what I'm saying is true, or at least I'm relatively sure. So
what does the underwear? What does the underwear do for them?
Okay, so as I mentioned before, it's the Mormons believe in being in the world, but not of it. That's kind of their underlying philosophy here. So these garments help to privately yet consistently set them apart from the rest of the world. And what they're trying to do, again, like I said earlier, is similar to what Amish traditions are doing. They're trying to set themselves apart from the world in some way, so that they have their own personal ritual, I suppose is the right word, with God, with their religion, something that ties them all the time to their religion, something that keeps them forever at all times thinking about. You can't escape it if it's constantly on your person.
So is this underwear made to be like really itchy? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm hoping that they just make these things really comfortable. Well, I'll tell you. Well, here's the thing. Like, because we live in America, and the vast majority of us don't want to live like the Amish, and even most of the Mormons, I would suppose, probably find this silly or feel silly doing it because it's out of the norm. One of the ways that they try to normalize this is to politely remind everyone that, hey, look, plenty of other religions wear special clothing. See, we're not so weird. And that's essentially how they kind of tell their flock, hey, look, don't feel so bad about this. This isn't as uncommon as you think. And then, they try to tell, everyone else as well, so that they don't feel singled out. But that's as good as it gets for them. But they're not going to escape the fact that they're all wearing magical underwear, or at least should be. And they're not doing it for any good reason. They revere these things. I mean, for example, they have at least the same reverence for their underwear as we do for the American flag, if you're really patriotic. Like, I remember growing up, and my dad would say, if the flag touched the ground, you're supposed to burn it. I don't know if that's a real thing or not, but he would tell me that.
I remember hearing that when I was a kid.
Yeah, and so I would never let the flag touch the ground. So every summer, I think it was Memorial Day weekend, when we opened up the lake cottage, we'd raise the flag, we'd unfold it. My dad was very ritualistic about this, and we were very careful not to let that thing touch the floor. He was very serious. If that touched the ground, we were going to put it in the fire, or burn it in some way. I guess he knew the quote unquote right way to do it, whatever that means. And so these Mormons have a very similar respect for their underwear, but it goes a step further, because some of them go so far as to not even take them off during intercourse. They actually specially tailor some underwear so that you don't have to take them off for intercourse.
I had no idea this was such a prevalent practice. I thought it was done by just like a select few, or maybe the really devout. That's pretty awesome.
Well, my understanding on Mormonism is pretty minute, but from what I gather, if they're not doing it, they should be doing it. So, it's kind of like, we're all only human. So, take that with a grain of salt. I don't honestly know what it's like in the Mormon culture. I do, however,
who
for
was
future
the guy
reference.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I do hope to, in the future, this is a hope, not a guarantee, have a Mormon pastor on this show to interview him about Mormonism. So hopefully in the future, I actually grew up next to this guy. He was my neighbor, my immediate neighbor, all the way through elementary school. I grew up in California, and this dude grew up Mormon. So I already know why he's a Mormon. I can tell you exactly why he's Mormon. But now he's a Mormon pastor, and it just kind of blows my mind because at the time when I was growing up with him, I knew that he was Mormon, but I didn't know what a Mormon was. I didn't care, and he didn't seem any different to me. But I guarantee you, if I was to see this man now, I would know that he was a Mormon, and that would bother me, and I don't think we could be friends right now. But we do keep in touch with each other over Facebook, and that's actually how I hope to get him on the show. He did seem interested, so there you go, folks. Hopefully we'll get to learn more about Mormonism in the near future. That'd be pretty great.
I would love to question a true believer.
Yeah, I think that'd be awesome. I'm really hoping that I don't scare him away.
Who was the guy who started the Mormon religion? Adam Smith? John Smith?
Joseph Smith.
Joseph Smith?
Yes.
Do you think, did he start this magic underwear thing? Do you know anything about the history of it? Or is he like...
I
mean, because that's pretty amazing that you can get people to wear magic underwear. I mean, it's amazing that you can get people to commit suicide by starving themselves to death, but magic underwear is pretty amazing too.
I know I at one time did print off a sheet on Mormonism and this underwear specifically, but I don't have it on me. I honestly don't know the origins of this. The origins of the underwear are a mystery to me. I know that they go back. I mean, they're modeled after underwear from the early turn of the century, so the last turn of the century.
Yes. I think you would know the answer to this question. Is there like any actual experiment, or has there been any like legitimate documented attempt to start a religion or a cult? I know
absolutely.
I know I watched a documentary on a guy doing it, but I just didn't know if there was anything that was more official, more.
Yeah, absolutely, man. There was actually a study done rather immorally, unethically, where a teacher went out with the intention of creating a cult amongst his students and amongst their peers to try to create a division, to create us and them. And he was quite successful. It got so successful that, and mind you, by the way, let's backtrack a little bit. Now, he modeled this after Hitler's regime and the methods that Hitler used to take over Germany with Nazism. And so he attempted the experiment just to see if it could be done in a hurry, and it sure can, absolutely. So he knew what he was doing. He was going in here with the intent of creating a fascist cult, and succeeded. It's incredibly easy to do, especially when you get them young. He was doing this at the high school level, and he was able to get some results that were threatening enough to warrant some serious action. It's now, I mean, obviously, experiments like that are now deemed unethical and can't be done anymore.
Is there a book on this, or?
Yeah, there's all kinds of
documentary or something?
Yeah, there's documentaries. There's peer-reviewed research paper. I mean, this is very well documented. Just look into. I honestly wish I could. I'm just recalling this information, but if you look into the Nazi high school experiment or something along those lines, you'll find it. You'll find similar experiments too. I mean, this is something that's been looked into quite thoroughly. As a matter of fact, people have been curious about this for a long time. I mean, essentially, what we're talking about here are the same principles that fall in line with that that experiment where they'll shock the person in increasingly higher voltage until they think that they're killing the person because somebody's telling them to do it. So this essentially falls into that territory.
Yeah, that is.
But before I run out of time, I would love to just kind of touch. We don't have to stop here because I think it'd be fun to stop on another one. Well, no. Let's actually. How much time do we have left here? It looks like
about 10. Well, maybe 8 minutes.
8 minutes?
Yeah.
Oh man.
I've got a question. If you got nowhere to go.
Oh, I got more places to go. I'm just bummed that I can't touch on more. I wish we had more than an hour.
Okay, well, I think this is a good question, but maybe not. Is there, okay, so here we are, we're kind of like looking at all of these different crazy religions, and we're kind of mocking it. At least I am. And I have to at least be honest enough to ask myself if I'm doing the same thing in some way.
The same thing as...
Well, do I believe something that's totally ridiculous?
Oh, I've thought about that.
That I'm just not aware of. But you're never aware of it at the time.
Well, I think
You're
this is a good
is
thing,
just the way life is.
You're questioning whether or not you're right. You're not just assuming you're right, and that's a good thing. And it's I don't think it's good. I don't think it's healthy, rather, to constantly be wondering whether or not there is a God. If this is something that bothers you to the extent that you can't get it out of your head, I highly recommend finding a way to come to a conclusion on that. If that means going to see somebody, go and see somebody. But it shouldn't consume you. But as so far as, do I feel that that I hold some absurd belief in the same way that I think that
well, I wouldn't say
circumcision. Sorry, go ahead.
I doubt it's as extreme as these we're looking at, but like, I'm assuming like the craziness of a belief, it can be kind of on a continuum to some extent. I don't know what the standard would be for basing that continuum, but like, yeah, I don't think you or I are going to like kill ourselves by starvation or anything crazy, but are we? I don't know. I just wonder how far out of it do you get? Like, I would say that I've definitely come a long way, but can you actually get to a point of zero?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? I mean, if you can solve hard solipsism, I think you can answer that question. But
True.
I personally don't believe in absolute certainty. I don't think it is possible. I think even if I say that I know what I'm going to do in the next 5 milliseconds, that is very possible. In the next 5 milliseconds, the universe could cease to exist. I accept that as my truth. I don't know what is going to be, no matter what. There are no guarantees as far as I'm concerned, because I don't believe in absolute certainty.
Yeah, but you believe in something enough to, well, at least I do, that I can put a value on what you're talking about. Like, I would say wearing magic underwear is dumb. Like, I am fairly certain. I mean, I'm almost 100%. I'm 100% certain that wearing underwear is dumb. Like, it's hard. It's going to be really hard to talk me out of that.
Well, I'm right there with you, man. There are people that do some of the most ridiculous. I mean, I got lists here of tribes and all kinds of cultures around the world that pierce their bodies, that suspend their bodies on their pierced bodies, that scar their bodies. There's for example,
cut off the end of their genitalia.
Oh yeah, there's a male tribe that cuts it all the way up, basically cuts it in half.
Oh my goodness! Or any of it, for God's sake! For any of it, for God's sake!
Yeah.
There's circumcision in our culture is just so weird to think about.
That's still my only regret. I had my son circumcised, and I wish I could go back and take it back. I mean, it doesn't honestly bother me that much. It's not a huge regret, but come to think of it, in hindsight, there was no reason to do that.
Circumcision's a good one. I think it took a while for me to see that. It's just a religious custom.
Doesn't really that's kind of how I thought about it.
But it definitely has a grip on the culture. Even as I got out of religion, I still thought that was probably a good thing to do. But
well, it's not that I feel that I don't feel like I've negatively pushed his life in the wrong direction.
Sure.
Because I gave him circumcision. The reason why I regret it is because that's his autonomy. And if he wants to do it, he should, have that right to do it. But if he doesn't want to, then he should have that right as well. And I don't think that I should be making the sorts of decisions about body alterations for other people, anybody, ever.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, unless it's crucial to some... That's not a crucial thing. What I'm talking about is, hey, your child's born, they're missing half a skull. What do you want to do?
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's put another, I don't know, let's put a piece of plastic in there or something. Let's figure this out. So anyway, I feel like I'm getting sidetracked really far because we only have a couple minutes left. I really want to touch on a very famous, very bizarre religious ritual Many of you have probably heard of this. This one's called the Eucharist. It's a fancy way of saying taking communion. This is a Catholic tradition, although, pretty much every Abrahamic religion has some sort of variation on this. The Catholics are by far the most fundamentalist about this. Now, there are some variations that take it just as seriously, but they're the ones that started it, so they get all the credit. So essentially, for those who don't know, which, who knows, it's a long-standing tradition within Christianity that one partake in what's called the Eucharist. It's a ritualistic form of perceived cannibalism, wherein the participants they eat bread and drink wine that represents the flesh and blood of their God, Jesus. The Eucharist undertaken as
but
the
they
rite
don't.
of...
A lot of them, don't they think that it actually is the body of Jesus Christ? Not represents, but is. Like literally changes into it.
Well, you make a good point, because I did phrase that incorrectly, because what I'm trying to get at here is specifically with Catholicism. Generally, when people take communion, I personally am of the opinion, at least of the Christians that I've talked to, Protestant Christians, not Catholics. Of the Protestants that I know, I don't believe that any of them believe that this actually happens. Now, the Catholics believe in a process called transubstantiation. They believe that the bread and the wine literally turn into flesh and blood. The flesh and blood, as a matter of fact, of their God, Jesus. It's taken as a rite of passage in most cases, as a means to obtain so-called sanctifying grace. So without this grace, you cannot be saved according to the Catholic faith. Although, most other Abrahamic religions share this, the Catholics take it extremely literally, and they're very fundamentalist rather, in their understanding of this.
It blows me away too. Sorry.
I mean, because they literally believe that this stuff is transforming into the flesh and blood of a Bronze Age rabbi demigod.
Not only that, I've never heard it put or framed in light of cannibalism. Like
that's what it is.
It is cannibalism. You're right. It's really weird. It's so weird.
If this is actually happening, if we give them the benefit of the doubt, if we allow it to happen, to just let them accept the fact that transubstantiation is a real thing, then by definition they are cannibals, because their demigod is not technically a demigod, which is why they don't call it a demigod, because it's supposed to be fully man and fully God. Right. But to me, if it's one part man, one part God, both equal, that's demigod as far as I'm concerned. So
either way, it's cannibalism or a shade of it. Who cares? It's still weird.
It's absolutely bizarre, and it's crazy to me to think that I remember growing up, and my parents used to scoff at the Satanists because they would literally drink blood until that got banned. But I remember them literally scoffing at that, like, "Oh, how could they actually? Just disgusting, really." And, the Catholics believe that's exactly what's happening. But they'll sit there and scoff at the Satanists for drinking blood. And that just blows me away. They don't see the double standard. And again, I want to emphasize here that the whole point in making this episode for me was to emphasize the fact that every religion has its absurdities. Even the most gentle and kind religions, like the Jains, they're pretty gentle and kind. They have some very absurd traditions. And guess what, guys? The Abrahamic religions, including Christianity, including Catholicism, they have absurdities too. And if you don't accept that as fact, well, I understand it. It's you're being biased. If I was in your shoes, I'd probably be thinking the same thing. But try to understand you're living in a bias if you're seeing it from that perspective. When you tell somebody that you are eating and drinking your God's flesh and blood, if they don't have an understanding of that, because they didn't grow up in a culture that just accepts this as the norm, that comes off as really weird. Okay? My son, for example, is not going to be brought up in a family tradition that partakes of communion. I'm not going to explain communion to him unless he asks about communion. I don't feel the need to do that. So if you were to tell him when he's 25 years old, for example, assuming by some miracle that he's never heard of a communion, doesn't really understand it, and you want to try to explain it to him, you're going to have to tell him that you're a cannibal, plain and simple. At least, at the very least, excuse me, that you believe to be yourself to be a cannibal. So there you go.
Wow. Well, good ending on that one.
All right. Well, before we go, because I'm assuming we're running out of time, before we go, I do want to mention that we do have a Facebook page up and running for this show. It's called the Hoosier Humanist Hour. You can look it up. Please like and share. On that page, we're looking for your guys' input. We want to know what you guys want to hear. Pick any topic. It honestly doesn't matter. We'll talk about pretty much anything. Obviously, we'll be discussing it from the humanist perspective. Hopefully, we'll be having a new web page up and running soon. We'll give you more details on that. If it's not... All right. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. My name is Caleb. D, thanks.
Yep.
And
bye, everybody.
All right.
That is all the time we have for you this week. This has been the Hoosier Humanist Hour. Be sure to check out FreeThought Fort Wayne on Facebook and on Meetup.com. Thank you for listening, and we hope your days are filled with logic, reasoning, and the eternal quest for knowledge.